So in previous articles, like how emotions get trapped in the body, I've talked about how when we have emotions that we don't resolve, those get trapped in the body. Today I'm going to start with the opposite end, which is when we have physical aches or pains that have happened, there's often an emotional component to those that where an emotion has actually increased the likelihood of getting an injury, or an emotion that's trapped creates or perpetuates emotional pain. Or another way to think about the intro to this piece is that what I'd like to do today is contrast the approach a physical therapist or a body worker might take to addressing some physical pain or chronic physical injury compared to the approach that I would take if somebody came to me with some physical chronic injury. And for the purposes of today, I actually have an injury or a discomfort that I've had for a while now that I'm going to explore and work with. So I'll guide you through and I'll show you exactly how I would work with an injury like this. This particular injury is a pain and a tightness around my left shoulder. I can feel it in here, around my collarbone, my clavicle, inside my clavicle, and also kind of connecting up into my chest bone and the lower vertebrae on my neck. And this started, I would say, about a month ago. I had a very intense period of work. I'd been working, let's say I'd been staying in Serbia, then I worked in Ireland, then I flew back to the US, had I think just a weekend back in the US, flew to Canada for a really important business meeting, flew back to New York, had a week there, and then flew off to Canada again for 2 weeks in minus 35-degree weather, really, really cold weather, and then down to Mexico for some more work. So I'd had this really, really intense period of time where I'd had a lot going on. And through that period of time, this really got tight. And normally I would have done something to resolve it during that time, but I wanted to save it up so I could get a good opportunity to actually do a video of how I would resolve or work with something like this. So first of all, if I were to go to a physical therapist with an injury like this or a pain like this, or a body worker, their attention would be on what are the physical symptoms and what are the physical pain. So let me start with the physical perspective for exploring this. So if I just bring my attention into it physically, first of all, there's a pain right in here that feels like it's in the bursa, which is the sac that kind of encapsulates the shoulder joint here. So there's definitely one particular piece in there that feels like it's an injury in the bursa. Then if I feel around, there's a tightness in the muscle here, and that's actually quite tender and delicate. That muscle there is definitely tight and unhappy. Right in here, there's some connective tissue between the collarbone and the muscles above the first rib here, which is really quite tight. And again, if I press in there, that's painful. And pressing in here actually sends a shooting pain down into my scapula, my shoulder blade at the back. So there's all kinds of stuff going on there. More there tension that if I press in there, connects up here into the muscles on the side of my neck. Same thing here, this muscle here has a tightness in it. Now, if I look at range of motion, it's basically fine. There's a little tweak in here that gets a little painful. There's a pull here I can feel when I stretch here, kind of pulls in through there. But basically I've still got full range of motion with that. So, if I went to a physical therapist or a body worker, that's probably the approach they take. And chances are they would decide some of these ligaments are sprained or tight, or some of these muscles are definitely tight, and they would get to work on releasing any occlusions, any places where the connective tissue is stuck, and then relaxing the muscles and stuff like that. So that would be the physical therapy approach. Now, as you know, my approach is different. From my perspective, looking at this now, the question I'm going to start asking myself, the thing I'm going to start exploring, is what are the emotional things that had my shoulder, had my clavicle, had my first rib tighten up, which then predisposed it to an injury. I'm not saying it caused the injury, but it made the injury much, much more likely. So looking back to the time I first noticed this, from an emotional perspective, what was going on there? First of all, as I mentioned, I was doing an insane amount of travel. It was a very tight schedule, not what I'd normally want, but there were various reasons that I did that, and it was the right thing to do at the time, even though it was physically challenging for me. Second thing is the time I had in Serbia. I found that difficult. I was just working and hanging out in Serbia, in Belgrade, but I found the environment there to be quite tense and a little scary, not overtly threatening, but there was a major civil war there and genocide and, really, really tough environment. And I think being around that country not that long after the war ended, being a natural empath, I think I kind of felt protected around that. Oh, and then the last thing I think that's really relevant here is I'm a year into my blog, and I put together a review of everything I've accomplished in the last year in terms of people reading the blog and articles I've written and interest and stuff. And I posted that review on a online forum that I'm a member of, asking for feedback. And quite honestly, I was expecting everybody to tell me that it was great and wonderful and I was doing great and I was right on track. But in fact, what happened was basically everybody who responded to me told me I was paying attention to the wrong things, I was doing it all wrong, and gave me incredible advice for how I should change everything I was doing on the blog. Not the writing, but how I'm thinking about what I track and what I measure and what my plans are for next year. So while that was incredibly valuable for me, it was also really, really difficult emotionally to hear the feedback about something I was really proud of and I've put an enormous amount of work into over the last year, and then discovering that I really needed to reorient my thinking on that. So it was useful feedback, and once I got over my pride, it was very, very valuable, but that was a difficult time. And now I think about it, it was right around then that this physical pain really started to develop. So, looking at it from my perspective, the shoulders relate to relationship or connection with other people, and intuitively that makes sense. If I reach out to connect with somebody, I use my shoulder. If I push somebody away, I use my shoulders. If I embrace somebody, I use my shoulders. So it's no surprise that the shoulders would be involved in how open we are to connection, relationship, or how close we are to relationship or connection. And I think, the tightening up when I was getting lots of difficult feedback makes sense. It's like, no, I don't really like this feedback. Please protect me, is that kind of tightening in the shoulder. So now from my perspective, what I'm going to do is drop in and start to bring my attention into my shoulder, clavicle, chest here, but bringing my attention less on the physical and more on the emotional content. The main value, the main use of the frontal lobes of conscious thought in personal growth and development is to direct and focus our attention in ways that are going to be useful to heal. And now I'm using that focusing attention of the frontal lobes, the conscious mind, to really bring my attention into this shoulder. Paying attention to the physical pain, but also starting to build a sense of curiosity about emotions. And one very important thing here is the mind, the conscious mind, likes to predict the future. It likes to know, it likes to be in control and in charge. And here I really have no idea what's going to happen, no idea what's going to unfold. And the important thing is to create a sense of conscious or intentional curiosity. So I'm bringing my attention into the body area without presupposition or expectation about what's going to happen. And as I do that, I can feel this area of the muscles just starting to relax. But the other thing that's happening is I'm also noticing there's more connected here. I'm actually noticing there's a pain and a discomfort in the muscles and connective tissue around my ribs here as well. So far, no idea what that's about, but I can start to explore it. I'm now beginning to use small movements. The smaller and the gentler, the better. If we use big movements, it really is kind of mental, whereas if we use really small movements, it starts to engage the cerebellum and the motor cortex in ways that are outside of conscious awareness. So using the focusing power of the mind to direct my unconscious mind to start to bring attention into this part of the body. And right there, there's a spike in the physical pain. But there's also some emotional kind of charge there. And I really found it just by kind of randomly exploring around. But now that I find that spot, I can really kind of explore around it to accentuate it. And right there, it's almost a sense of nauseousness. It's a really unpleasant feeling. And it's kind of like it goes down through my lungs, inside the lower lung here, inside the ribs here. And there was one wave of release just by accepting it and connecting with it. I can already feel something has opened up, and there's more freedom in my lungs, the bottom of the lungs there. Importantly, I don't need to have words for what it is. I don't need to have a mental description for it. Simply connecting with it in its own terms is enough. So now I'm exploring again. Now really letting my body do it. This is not driven by my mind. But there's subconscious parts in my brain. And my body wisdom are now engaged in exploring. And there's something inside the ribs and lung. The lungs, as I discussed in my article on grief and sadness, are a primary place for storing unresolved sadness and grief in the body. So probably has something to do with sadness or loss, but the mental understanding doesn't really matter. The important thing is my body and subconscious have the willingness to explore it. And there's this arrangement of my neck and shoulder, and everything kind of compresses down into that point in the lung. And compression is a good way of increasing awareness of something that's closed off, because there's a subconscious tightness anyway to compress it. And when we do that more, it just increases awareness of what's hidden. I shifted fairly quickly in one or two breaths, and I don't know if you saw it, but there was just a release in some of the muscles in my shoulder here. Once this released, this part of my shoulder knew it was okay to let go. And in working with this, one of the things I'm finding is, to this particular tightness and wound, there are a lot of wet layers. So this wasn't some huge, big event. There was no trauma or emotional difficulty or some big emotional event that happened. I'm starting to get the impression that this was more, I was forcing myself to work harder, to travel more, to deal with jet lag, to deal with new situations, senior people in a new client company. So I was driving myself without taking the time to deal with whatever emotions and issues were coming up. And as a result, started building up layer upon layer upon layer of tightness and unresolved emotional wound on this right side of my body. Now for me, this has only been a month or two. But most people have a habit of when they have an injury or a wound, physical or emotional, they tighten up around it and build layers and layers and layers over a lifetime, so that when you see old people, a lot of old people really are kind of twisted up in a way that's physically unhealthy and emotionally unhealthy, because we build up these layers and we don't deal with them. So now again, something shifted. That's two pieces that have shifted now. And I feel a lot more ease and openness. There's still physical pain. It almost feels like it's in the periosteum, the surface, the soft, on bones there's a soft shiny surface, the outside of the bone. But there's definitely, the pain's not new, it's always been there, but now I'm much more aware of the pain there. And in the back, right here, there's actually a muscle that's twitching. And now I have a strong sense of confusion. The mind hates confusion. It wants to know what's going on. So I've got this drive to know or find out or push myself. But for healing, actually confusion is really great, because it means the old model, the old belief I had, is no longer valid. And there's a new model, there's a new belief, there's a new physical and emotional arrangement waiting to emerge. My mind wants to make bigger movements and stretch it out because this is painful under here. But I know it's actually more important to slow it down and let my body lead. And right now this is unpleasant enough. I kind of want to run away from it. Okay, now I've got it. There's a feeling of kind of great compassion. There's a heat under my hand here. There's a lot of heat, a lot of energy, which indicates there's a healing or a repatterning going on. Still have that disconcerting twitching around my shoulder blade, but there's this big warmth under my hand, like a red heat, a pleasant warm heat. There's the top rib here, right under the first rib, the very top of the lung, and the pleural dome. There's a dome that goes off over the top of the lung, right in there. Just like sadness, like I want to cry. A lot of this tightness has just been protecting, closing off pain, tears. So very gently connecting with that, with self-compassion. And it's a sense that with the breath, that emotion is flowing and releasing. It feels like such a relief to release this. It's kind of like I have this feeling that after this I'll just be able to curl up and relax and rest. I've been pushing through for weeks and weeks now. You know, if there's an emotional pain we have, sometimes temporarily it's appropriate to power through it. You know, getting in from Ireland, a weekend in New York, flying straight off to Canada for a really big meeting that, as it turns out, will probably set up my consulting work for the next several years. It was worth pushing myself through that. But now that I have the time, it's worth taking the time to release it. The important thing is I connected with it, released it, and now with that release, I've got way more freedom of motion in my shoulder, and the healing process can start again. So that's it for today.